In the middle of the 20th century, a small island in the Caribbean suddenly became the center of a political earthquake. You see, the Cuban Revolution wasn't just some local uprising. Nope. This was an event that would completely redraw the battle lines of the Cold War and change the course of history in the Western Hemisphere for decades. So, how did it all go down? Let's get into it.
I mean, really think about that question. It sounds like something straight out of a Hollywood movie, right? A tiny band of guerrilla fighters, led by some young lawyer, goes up against a 37,000-strong professional army. An army that's armed and backed by a superpower. How on earth did they pull that off? That's the big question we're going to unpack right here. All right, so to figure this out, we're going to break it down into 5 key parts. First, we'll look at the corrupt republic that really planted the seeds for all this. Then we'll see how a totally disastrous first attack somehow created a legend. After that, we'll follow the insurgency as it grew from the mountains, watch the old regime completely fall apart, and finally explore the massive, massive global impact of it all. Okay, so first things first. To really get a handle on the revolution, you've got to look at what Cuba was like before all the fighting started. This thing didn't just happen overnight, not at all. It was more like a slow burn, fueled by decades of instability, foreign meddling, and just staggering levels of corruption. So from the moment Cuba got its formal independence back in 1902, its politics were, well, a total mess. Corruption was just part of the system. Politicians saw public office as their personal piggy bank. For example, the government right before Batista was said to have stolen over $90 million. That was a quarter of the entire national budget. Fulgencio Batista, he was part of this whole scene for years. But in 1952, when it looked like he was going to lose the election, he just decided to, tear up the rules and take over with the military. And this quote from a regular Cuban citizen at the time, man, it just says it all. It perfectly captures how people were feeling. For a lot of Cubans, there was this huge difference. Yeah, the old governments were corrupt, sure, but at least the people had elected them. Batista just taking power, that felt like a total violation. A theft not just of money, but of democracy itself. And that feeling, that's what created the perfect environment for something more radical to take root. And that radical opposition didn't have to wait long for a leader. This is where Fidel Castro, a young, fiery lawyer, steps onto the stage. He basically decided that if you couldn't fix the system legally, then you'd just have to break it with force. So on July 26, 1953, Castro and his brother Raul put their plan into action. They got together about 126 fighters, and the idea was to storm the Moncada barracks, the second biggest military base in the whole country. The plan was, on paper, pretty straightforward. Seize the weapons, hand them out to the people, and trigger a massive uprising that would kick Batista out. A simple, bold, 3-step plan.
In reality, it was a complete and utter disaster. I mean, just a total failure. They were outgunned, outnumbered. The attack was crushed almost immediately. 5 rebels were killed in the fighting, but then Batista's forces executed another 56 after they were captured. Castro and the other survivors, all rounded up and thrown in jail. From a military standpoint, it was an absolute catastrophe. But here's where things get really wild. Castro somehow managed to turn that epic military defeat into a brilliant political victory. At his trial, he gave this incredible 4-hour speech, saying his actions weren't a crime, but a patriotic duty. And he ended with this line that became legendary. The speech got passed around in secret, and suddenly, he was a national hero, a symbol of defiance. Batista, probably trying to look like a good guy, granted him amnesty in 1955. And let me tell you, that was a mistake he would seriously, seriously regret. So after getting out of prison, Castro heads to Mexico. He starts to regroup, train a new force, and this is where he meets a key partner, an Argentine doctor named Ernesto Che Guevara. By late 1956, they were ready. They came back to Cuba to launch a full-on guerrilla war from the rugged Sierra Maestra Mountains. And just look at the odds they were up against here. It's insane. Batista had a 37,000-man army with tanks, planes, and all the latest gear from the United States. Castro's entire force, at times it was fewer than 300 guys. But, and this is a big but, they had some serious advantages. They were masters of guerrilla warfare, they had the support of people in the countryside, and they had a secret weapon, a pirate radio station called Radio Rebelde that broadcast their message all over the island. Now, the start was yet again a total mess. The yacht they used, the Granma, was meant for 12 people, but they crammed 82 on board. It landed late, in the wrong spot, and most of them were ambushed. Only about 20 rebels even survived. But from that tiny core, they started to win.
A small victory at La Plata in 1957 was a huge boost for morale. Then the government made a huge mistake. They assassinated a key rebel organizer named Frank País, which sparked a massive general strike. And then came the knockout blow. In March 1958, the U.S. got tired of Batista's brutal tactics and all the bad press and hit him with an arms embargo. That cut off his supply of weapons and spare parts, basically crippling his army. Okay, so by late 1958, the tables had completely turned. The momentum was all on the rebel side. Castro's forces, who were once stuck in the mountains, launched a huge, coordinated attack across the island. And Batista's army, which was demoralized and badly led, just started to fall apart.
The final push really kicks off with the Battle of Guisa. This was a huge gamble. Castro's rebels took on a much larger army force head-on, and after 10 days of tough fighting, they won. They captured a key town and proved they could win a real conventional fight. Right after that, another rebel column, this one led by Camilo Cienfuegos, surrounded a government garrison. After a 10-day siege, where they even tried to use a homemade tank built on a tractor, which is amazing, the 250 soldiers just gave up. That surrender sent a shockwave of panic through the rest of the army.
And the final nail in the coffin was the Battle of Santa Clara. Che Guevara's forces took over this key city, captured an armored train full of government reinforcements, and basically cut the island in half. This was the checkmate move. As soon as Batista heard the news from Santa Clara, he knew it was over. In the wee hours of New Year's Day 1959, he grabbed his money, boarded a plane, and fled Cuba for good. Just like that, his regime collapsed. The revolution had won.
But kicking Batista out was really only the beginning. Winning the war was one thing. Now they had to navigate a brand new, way more complicated battlefield, the global Cold War. Yeah, the shooting had stopped, but the real fight, the ideological struggle for what Cuba would become and for the future of Latin America, that was just getting started. And this right here really shows you what a massive change this was. I mean, look at the before and after. It's like night and day. Before 1959, the U.S. was Cuba's #1 ally, totally dominating its economy. After the revolution, a sworn enemy. We're talking a trade embargo, the Bay of Pigs invasion, the whole deal. And on the flip side, you've got the Soviet Union. Before, they couldn't have cared less about Cuba. But now, they saw a golden opportunity to get a strategic ally right in America's backyard. They jumped in as Cuba's main supporter, which, as we know, eventually led the entire world to the brink of nuclear war. And check out this quote from President John F. Kennedy just a month before he was assassinated. It's a pretty stunning admission, right? He's basically saying that American policy, propping up a corrupt dictator like Batista, is what created the very revolution they ended up fighting against. It's this powerful, candid moment where he admits U.S. foreign policy totally backfired. So here's the bottom line. The legacy of this thing is incredibly complicated. Was it a heroic fight for freedom against a tyrant? Absolutely. Was it also the moment a small island got sucked into a global chess match between two superpowers? You bet. The truth, as it usually is with history, is that it's a messy combination of both. And of course, the story doesn't stop there. What happened next led directly to some of the most intense moments of the entire Cold War. We've got whole explainers on both the Bay of Pigs invasion and the Cuban Missile Crisis right in our Cold War playlist, so you should definitely go check those out. And hey, if you found this breakdown useful, make sure you subscribe to the channel so you don't miss what's next. Thanks for watching.